Ange, good to see you. International breaks coming so early. I wonder for managers what that's like, 3 games in. Have you taken stock and looked back and reflected on those performances?
Yeah, it is. The first one's always a bit of a weird one because you kind of get going into the season and you've got to pause a little bit. Look, I guess from our perspective, when you're going to any international break on a loss, it always feels a bit longer because you want to play the next game. But it did give us a bit of time just to sort of just reflect on the first 3 games, and we still had some guys here we could do some training with, and it gave us an opportunity, like I said, just to reflect. And we've had 3 really solid performances so far. The results haven't reflected that, but I think we've had a decent start, and it allows us now with the international break over. We know we've got a good series of games now with Carabao Cup and Europe as well, so some good focus there.
How do you feel about derbies? Because I'm speaking to you ahead of the North London derby pretty early on in the campaign as well. Yeah. And you've been a manager at Celtic where the derby there was huge. This is another huge derby. How are you feeling about them? Yeah,
looking forward to it. I mean, you enjoy those occasions. There's always an extra spice when it's a fight for turf as well, because it's the same territory, and you can tell that it means so much to both clubs' supporters, and you want to be involved in that. We know the atmosphere is going to be brilliant on Sunday in our favour, which is nice, but we want to use that energy, and it adds so much to what is already a really tough fixture, because they're a top team. They've been a top team for the last couple of years, and for us it's a good challenge, both from a competitive perspective, but also for us to give our supporters some real joy.
Do you hear from your bosses more in a week like this? See, if it was my job, I probably would be.
Yeah. No, I don't hear too much from my bosses at all, to be honest. I think the kind of significance of a fixture like this, but I've always said that you shouldn't really, as professionals, prepare any differently, really, because every game should be one that you want to win. Every game should be one that you want to perform at your best. That's the mentality I've always had. The consequences maybe of this game are greater for our supporters, for sure, in terms of their emotions and feelings, but for us, we want to make sure we're at our best for this game, but we want to make sure we prepare well and at our best for every game. And I'd like to think that my bosses, for want of a better word, don't think I would prepare any differently for this than any other game I'm in charge of.
There is a lot of narrative around it possibly setting the tone for Spurs, and I know you were asked about it in the press conference and you spoke about it could give you some good momentum. Is there any part of you that feels that it could actually set a good tone?
It certainly helps, because it's not just that you're winning against a rival, you're winning against a top team, so that gives you belief. I think it's certainly, if we want to be the team we want to become and have success, you've got to perform in the big games. So this is kind of that double-edged sword of both a big game but also a derby. So if you can come through that as a conqueror, then it gives you belief, but it also doesn't guarantee you anything. It doesn't mean that next week's game is going to be any easier for us, or we can somehow prepare ourselves any differently.
I speak to managers a lot about fine margins in football, but one of the things that I thought doesn't often get spoken about as much is timing in football. And we know that Arsenal are going to be without some key players. That international break for them did mean that Odegaard is not going to be available. For you, with timing and potentially getting Van der Ven and Solanke back, could this be a nice mix of everything coming together?
I don't think that way, because I think if you fall into that trap of somehow thinking that Arsenal aren't going to be at their best, or just assuming we are, then I think that's where the potential for a slip-up occurs. I think you go into this game, look, they're a top team, and they've been a top team, like I said, the last 2 years, and they're not relying on 1 or 2 players. They've got a strong squad, and they've always performed well in big games. So anything other than us believing they're going to be at their best it would be foolhardy for us, and it's the same reverse for us, just because we're getting some players back. I think our performances have still been strong without those players, but we've got to prepare ourselves to play our best football against a top opponent, and whether it's a good time or a bad time to meet them, I think the reality is the time is now, and then we've got to be ready for that.
What do those absentees mean in a sense, though, of game plan? Because I imagine you could possibly dictate the tempo in that midfield, which might have been more difficult to do with Rice, with Ødegaard in there.
Yeah, to a certain extent, but I think last year when they were playing, we still kind of had the chunk of the game against them. So I don't think it makes a big difference. I think what we try and do every game is to really focus on ourselves and see whether we can impose our football on the opposition and try and sort of not allow them to get into sort of the rhythm and groove that they want. So irrespective of who their starting lineup is, I think the focus is still on us to try and sort of impose our football on them.
A word on Son and his record in these matches: 8 goals, 2 assists. It has to be more than a coincidence, just because you look over these rivalries over time and there's always a player that delivers. And is that something that you recognise quite quickly with him?
Yeah, and you're right. It's not just by accident. That's what makes him a top player. And as I said before, top teams win in the big games, and top players perform in the big games. And he is that. He's a world-class player, and in these big games, it's where you want the sort of the cream to rise, and he does. He's not daunted by it. He's not he's not in any way allowed himself to lack any self-belief just because it is a big game. And if anything, he just wants to be at the forefront of it, and that's what top players do.
In your time here, you've made him captain. How do you think he's changed and will continue to change as a player?
I don't know how much he's changed, but I think the responsibility has not weighed him down. It's sometimes, when you kind of give this responsibility to players, irrespective of their ability, sometimes it can suppress them in some ways, or it's a burden that's too much to carry. But I think he's really come to it and embraced it. I mean, he was captain in his nation, so he had those leadership qualities. He understood what it takes. And the thing with Sonny is he leads as much by example as anything else. He trains hard every day. He's always positive in the dressing room with every interaction he has, whether it's players or staff. And like I said, he performs when it matters. So I think being captain has fit with him well. It's not a surprise to me. And I'm really confident that over the next 2-3 years, longer, depending on how he feels about himself, that he can really become an even sort of more meaningful contributor in all aspects for us.
I'm keen to know about your take on your style of football, because I've read so many players talking about it as well. James Maddison's been speaking about everyone having to buy in, and if somebody doesn't buy in, that's where it can fall. And that made me think of this house of cards analogy, and if one goes, the whole thing goes. Is that how you would describe it?
To a certain extent, yeah. It does require, I keep telling the players, it's not something you can just kind of dip your toe into. You just got to jump in and sort of immerse yourself in it and believe in it in a totality, because it does require a real commitment to certain principles that, if somebody does hesitate in a moment, it is such a collective approach that invariably it breaks down. It doesn't mean that within that context everyone has to be at the highest possible level, but for it to really be the juggernaut we need it to be successful in this league anyway, you need a sort of total buy-in from everyone, not just players but from staff and the whole club, because like I said, it's not something you can just kind of dabble around the edges or try. You've got to be totally committed to it.
So with that in mind, and coming back to the North London derby, Mikel Arteta's made changes that have seen his team really compete at the top of the table now. But would you say that you're braver, that you will be braver, the braver side this weekend?
No, I wouldn't characterise it, because I think it takes courage or bravery, whichever approach you take. Because what we all know, all of us managers know, is that there isn't an approach that guarantees you anything. You can, for all intents and purposes, plan and prepare the best way and still fall short. That's the nature of football. It's a living, breathing thing that, as much as us managers try and control, we know we can't control all aspects of it. So I think the courage and bravery exists with all forms and the way you play the game and every approach you take. I think what's more important than that is how much belief you have in it. And we'll certainly go into the game believing that we can, play our football and beat a very, very good opponent.
You have spoken as well about being in this second season, and it means having a second go at the North London derbies. Do you think you've learned anything? Did anything surprise you?
No, nothing surprised me. I think they were very entertaining games, plenty of goals in both. I think the first one, at their place, we played really well that day and sort of matched it in many areas with them. And probably slightly unfortunate not to come away with a victory. The game here, they blew us away in the first half, but we kind of hung in there in the second half and made a game of it. So nothing really surprised me. The atmosphere in both games was fantastic. The quality of football in both games was right up there, and I expect the same on Sunday. Hopefully plenty of goals, but hopefully with us on the positive side of the ledger.
Finally then, opportunities created. You've been making plenty. Having Dominic Solanke, who's been one of your big summer signings, potentially available for this one, is that the conversion rate? Is that the secret to this, him going in with Son?
It certainly helps. We've kind of missed Dom and Richie. We've kind of got, I think, two top strikers, and Dom's only played 90 minutes for us, and even that, he got injured early in that game, so we haven't really had, the access to them. But whether it's this weekend, I think over the course of time, having Dom back in the side and Richie available and fit very soon after, is going to make us more of a threat in the front third. I've got no doubt about that. And if we continue to create the chance we have, then guys like that, I'm sure, will capitalise.